according to the circumstances. Friendly advance there was none, for he showed his white teeth slightly, and his eyes glittered as they were fixed upon mine. Suddenly I caught sight of the deer lying transfixed by the boy's spear, and without a word I walked quietly to where the little animal lay, the boy backing slowly and watchfully from me, but holding his waddy ready for a blow, or to hurl at me, it seemed, if I ventured to attack. I wanted to make friends, and as soon as I had reached the dead deer I stooped down, holding my gun ready though, and taking hold of the spear drew it out and offered it to the young hunter. He understood my motion, for he made a couple of steps forward quickly, only to draw back, uttering an angry ejaculation, and raise his waddy in a threatening way. "He thinks I want to trap him," I said to myself, and taking the spear in regular native style, as Jimmy had taught me, I smiled and nodded, tossed it in the air and let it drop a few yards away with the shaft upright and towards his hand. I pointed to it and drew back a few yards, when, quick as some wild animal, he made 2 or 3 bounds, caught up the spear, poised it, and stood as if about to hurl it at me. It was not a pleasant position, and my first impulse was to raise my gun to my shoulder, but my second was to stand firm, resting on my piece, and I waved my hand to him to lower the spear. The boy hesitated, uttered a fierce cry, and stamped one foot angrily, but I waved my hand again, and thrusting my hand into the pocket, pulled out a ring of brass wire, such as we carried many of for presents to the savages, and I tossed it to him. I saw the boy's eyes glitter with eagerness, but he was too suspicious to move, and so we stood for some minutes, during which I wondered whether my companions had heard the report of my gun, and if so, whether they would come up soon. If they did, I was sure they would alarm the boy, who seemed as suspicious as some wild creature, and shook his spear menacingly as soon as I took a step forward. A thought struck me just then as I saw a red spot glisten on a leaf, and stepping forward I saw another and another, which I pointed to, and then again at a continuous series of them leading towards the dense bush. I took a few more steps forward when the boy suddenly bounded to my side, as if he realised that I had saved his life and that he was bound to try and save me in return. He uttered some words fiercely, and catching my arm drew me back, pointing his spear menacingly in the direction taken by the great savage, and in response to his excited words I nodded and smiled and yielded to his touch. We had not taken many steps before he stopped short to stand and stare at me wonderingly, saying something the while. Then he touched me, and as I raised my hand to grasp his, he uttered a fierce cry and pointed his spear at me once more, but I only laughed, very uncomfortably I own, and he lowered it slowly and doubtfully once again, peering into my eyes the while, his whole aspect seeming to say, "Are you to be trusted or no?" I smiled as the best way of giving him confidence, though I did not feel much confidence in him. He seemed too handy with his spear. He, however, lowered this and looked searchingly at me, while I wondered what I had better do next. For this was an opportunity. Here was a lad of my own age who might be ready to become friends and be of great service to us, but he was as suspicious and excitable as a wild creature, and ready to dash away or turn his weapons against me at the slightest alarm. It was very hard work to have to display all the confidence, but I told myself it was incumbent upon me as a civilized being to show this savage a good example, and generally I'm afraid that I was disposed to be pretty conceited, as, recalling the native words I had picked up from our followers, I tried all that were available, pointing the while to the deer and asking him by signs as well if he would sell or barter it away to me for food. My new acquaintance stared at me, and I'm afraid I did not make myself very comprehensible. One moment he would seem to grasp my meaning, the next it appeared to strike him that I must be a cannibal and want to eat him when I made signs by pointing to my mouth. At last, though, the offer of a couple of brass rings seemed to convince him of my friendliness, and he dragged the little deer to me and laid it at my feet. After this we sat down together, and he began chattering at a tremendous rate, watching my gun, pointing at the spots on the leaves, and then touching himself, falling down, and going through a pantomime as if dying, ending by lying quite stiff with his eyes closed, all of which either meant that if I had not fired at the big black my companion would have been killed, or else that I was not on any consideration to use my thunder and lightning weapon against him. I did not understand what he meant, and he had doubtless very little comprehension of what I was trying to convey, but by degrees we became very good friends, and he took the greatest of interest in my dress, especially in my stout boots and cartridge belt. Then, too, he touched my gun, frowning fiercely the while. My big case knife also took up a good deal of his attention, and had to be pulled out several times, and its qualities as a cutter of tough wood shown. After this he drew my attention to his slight spear, which, though of wood, was very heavy, and its point remarkably sharp and hard. In spite of its wanting a steel point, I felt no doubt of its going through anything against which it was directed with force. He next held out his waddy for me to examine. This was a weapon of black-looking wood with a knob at the end about the shape of a good-sized tomato. I took hold of the waddy rather quickly, when it must have struck the boy that I had some hostile intention, for he snatched at it, and for the moment it seemed as if there was a struggle going on. Then I felt a violent blow from behind, as if a large stone had fallen upon my head. And that was all. End of chapter 26. How I got into serious difficulties.